The shocking truth about the Manila Trench megaquake. What if I told you that beneath the pristine waters off the western coast of the Philippines lurks a geological time bomb that scientists say could unleash one of the deadliest earthquakes in modern history? The Manila Trench doesn't make headlines like the San Andreas Fault or Japan's notorious subduction zones. But this underwater canyon stretching along the western edge of the Philippines could be hiding one of the Earth's most dangerous seismic threats. This deep oceanic trench runs roughly north-south for about 1,500 kilometers from Taiwan all the way down to Mindoro in the Philippines, defining the boundary where two of Earth's massive tectonic plates meet in a geological standoff. To understand why this matters, we need to explore what makes the Manila Trench particularly concerning to scientists and seismologists. Unlike typical fault lines where plates slide horizontally past each other, the Manila Trench marks a subduction zone, a place where one tectonic plate is being forced beneath another in a slow-motion collision that's been ongoing for millions of years. Specifically, the Eurasian Plate, which includes the continental shelf of Southeast Asia, is diving underneath the Philippine Sea Plate at various rates, up to 100 millimeters per year in some sections. This subduction process is essentially Earth's recycling system for its crust. As one plate descends beneath another, tremendous forces build up where these plates lock against each other. When that locked boundary eventually gives way, the sudden release of energy creates an earthquake. And in subduction zones like the Manila Trench, these aren't just any earthquakes. They're potentially the largest our planet can produce. What's particularly troubling about the Manila Trench is what scientists call its seismic silence. Despite the high convergence rates between these massive plates, the historical record shows a surprising lack of major earthquakes along this structure. Since the Spanish colonization of the Philippines in the 1560s, there have been no recorded earthquakes exceeding magnitude 7.6 originating from this trench. This absence of major seismic events isn't good news, quite the opposite. It suggests what seismologists call a seismic gap, where strain energy has been accumulating without release for centuries. Think of it like stretching a rubber band. The longer you pull without letting go, the more energy gets stored, and the more violent the snap when it finally breaks. The scientific community has been conducting extensive research on this concerning phenomenon. Advanced seafloor mapping, GPS measurements, and computer modeling all suggest that the Manila Trench is accumulating what's called slip deficit, the difference between how much the plates should be moving past each other based on their known speeds, and how much they're actually moving. This deficit represents stored energy that will eventually be released. Recent studies estimate that segments of the Manila Trench could potentially generate earthquakes with magnitudes between 8.5 and potentially exceeding 9.0 on the Richter scale. For context, the devastating 2011 Tohoku earthquake that triggered the Fukushima disaster was a magnitude 9.0. The difference between each magnitude is exponential. A magnitude 9.0 earthquake releases approximately 32 times more energy than a magnitude 8.0. When we compare the Manila Trench to other subduction zones around the Pacific's Ring of Fire, the similarities become even more concerning. The geological characteristics of the Manila Trench share features with the Sumatra Andaman subduction zone, which produced the catastrophic 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami that killed over 230,000 people across 14 countries. Both zones have high convergent rates, extended periods of seismic quiescence, and the potential for rupturing across multiple segments simultaneously. What makes subduction zone earthquakes particularly destructive isn't just their magnitude, but their additional tsunami-generating potential. When a section of seafloor suddenly thrusts upward during a subduction earthquake, it displaces an enormous volume of water. This displacement travels as a series of waves that can cross entire ocean basins, growing taller as they approach shallower coastal waters. For the Philippines, a nation of over 7,600 islands with countless coastal communities, this dual threat of extreme ground shaking and tsunami waves represents a worst-case scenario. The science behind predicting exactly when such an earthquake might occur remains imperfect. Seismologists can identify the potential for large earthquakes based on accumulated strain, but pinpointing the timing remains impossible. This uncertainty is partly what makes the Manila Trench so concerning. We know the threat exists, but not when it will materialize. To better understand this threat, researchers are deploying increasingly sophisticated technologies. Underwater seismometers monitor the faintest movements along the trench. GPS stations throughout the Philippines track subtle shifts in the Earth's crust that might indicate changing stress patterns. Satellite observations measure the broader deformation of land masses around the subduction zone. All of these data points help scientists refine their models and improve our understanding of the potential hazard. There's also fascinating research being done on ancient tsunami deposits, layers of sand and debris carried inland by prehistoric tsunamis and coastal sediments. These geological clues help scientists reconstruct the timeline of past events and estimate recurring intervals. Some studies suggest the Manila Trench may produce major earthquakes on cycles spanning hundreds to 1,000 years, placing us well within the window for another major event. The earthquake potential of the Manila Trench doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of a complex network of fault systems throughout the Philippines, including the Philippine Fault Zone that cuts through many of the country's major islands. This creates scenarios where a major subduction zone earthquake could trigger movement along these other fault systems, potentially causing a cascade of seismic events affecting multiple regions simultaneously. In a Manila Trench rupture scenario, the immediate impact zone would experience violent ground motion lasting not seconds, but minutes. The longer an earthquake shakes, the more cumulative damage it causes. Buildings designed to withstand brief shaking begin to fatigue and ultimately fail during prolonged events. This extended duration is a hallmark of megathrust earthquakes and dramatically increases their destructive potential. The intensity of ground shaking would vary significantly across the Philippines based on distance from the rupture and local geological conditions. Western coastal regions of Luzon would likely experience the most severe effects, with modified Mercalli intensity ratings potentially reaching 9 or 10, levels at which even well-designed structures sustain heavy damage. Metro Manila, despite being farther from the trench, faces amplified risks due to portions of the city being built on soft sediments that magnify seismic waves, a phenomenon known as soil amplification. But the earthquake itself is just the beginning. Within minutes of the main shock, coastal communities would face an even more urgent threat: tsunami waves generated by the sudden displacement of the ocean floor. Computer simulations suggest that in a worst-case scenario, tsunami waves could reach western Philippine coastlines in as little as 15 to 30 minutes, giving residents precious little time to evacuate to higher ground. These tsunami waves wouldn't arrive as the dramatic walls of water often depicted in movies. Instead, they typically begin as a rapid, abnormal rise in water level, like an incredibly fast tide that keeps coming in and doesn't stop. The first wave isn't always the largest. Subsequent waves can arrive hours apart and be even more destructive. Modeling indicates that tsunami heights could range from 3 meters to potentially over 10 meters in some coastal areas of western Luzon, Palawan, and Mindoro, more than enough to devastate coastal communities. Metro Manila, home to over 13 million people and one of the most densely populated urban areas in the world, presents a particularly concerning vulnerability. While the capital might be somewhat protected from direct tsunami impact by its location on Manila Bay, it would face severe ground shaking, complicated by its vulnerable infrastructure. Many older structures throughout the metropolis predate modern seismic building codes. Informal settlements, home to millions, are built with minimal engineering oversight and would be especially susceptible to collapse. Critical infrastructure across affected regions would face cascading failures. Power transmission systems would likely fail immediately, triggering widespread blackouts. Water systems dependent on electricity would cease functioning, bridges, and elevated roadways could collapse or become impassable, hampering evacuation and emergency response efforts. Telecommunication networks would be overwhelmed or disabled, creating an information vacuum exactly when coordination is most crucial. Have you ever considered how long your family could survive if all modern infrastructure, electricity, water, food distribution, communications, suddenly disappeared for weeks or even months? How prepared is your community for this level of disruption? Beyond the immediate impact zone, secondary hazards would multiply the disaster's effects. Landslides would be triggered throughout mountainous regions, potentially blocking evacuation routes and isolating communities. Soil liquefaction, where seemingly solid ground temporarily behaves like a liquid during intense shaking, could cause buildings to sink or tip over in areas built on reclaimed land or water-saturated soils, which includes significant portions of Metro Manila's business districts. Post-earthquake fires, often caused by ruptured gas lines or electrical shorts, could spread rapidly through damaged areas where firefighting capability has been compromised. The economic consequences would be staggering. The Philippines has been one of Southeast Asia's fastest-growing economies, but a disaster of this magnitude could erase decades of economic progress overnight. Direct damage to infrastructure and property could potentially reach hundreds of billions of dollars. Business disruption would cascade throughout the economy as supply chains collapse and essential services fail. The Philippines' robust business process outsourcing sector, which employs over 1 million people and contributes approximately 7% to the national GDP, could face prolonged disruption due to damaged offices and compromised telecommunications infrastructure. Tourism, another major economic driver accounting for roughly 13% of GDP pre-pandemic, would likely collapse in affected regions for months or years. Agricultural production would suffer from damaged irrigation systems, transportation disruptions, and potentially contaminated fields in coastal areas inundated by tsunami waters carrying debris and pollutants. The financial system itself would face unprecedented stress. Insurance mechanisms would be overwhelmed, as the scale of claims could exceed the capacity of domestic insurers. Government finances would be strained by the simultaneous drop in tax revenue and massive increase in emergency spending needs. International assistance would be essential, but coordinating and effectively deploying aid presents enormous logistical challenges in the chaotic aftermath of such a catastrophe. History offers sobering parallels that help us understand the potential scale of such a disaster. The 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami caused over 230,000 deaths across 14 countries and economic damages exceeding $10 billion. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in Japan resulted in nearly 20,000 deaths and became the costliest natural disaster in world history, with economic impacts exceeding $360 billion, despite Japan being one of the world's most earthquake-prepared nations. The Philippines, with fewer resources and more vulnerable infrastructure, could face even more severe proportional impacts. Recovery from such an event would likely take decades rather than years. After the 2010 Haiti earthquake, which was far smaller in magnitude than a potential Manila Trench event, many communities were still struggling with basic reconstruction a decade later. Even with significant international support, the scale of rebuilding required after a mega earthquake would strain resources and capacity at every level. In the face of such a formidable threat, the question turns from if to how the Philippines can prepare for, survive, and recover from a potential Manila Trench mega earthquake. This begins with understanding the current state of the nation's earthquake monitoring and warning systems, which have seen significant improvement in recent decades but still faces substantial challenges. The Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology forms the backbone of the country's earthquake monitoring network. The agency maintains a network of 74 seismic stations strategically positioned throughout the archipelago, continuously monitoring ground movements. These sensors feed data to central facilities where seismologists analyze the information in real time. When an earthquake occurs, this network can typically determine its location, depth, and magnitude within minutes. However, earthquake early warning capabilities in the Philippines remains limited compared to more advanced systems in countries like Japan. The fundamental challenge is physics itself. Earthquake waves travel at speeds ranging from 3 to 8 kilometers per second. This means that areas closest to the epicenter have almost no warning time before shaking begins. Only communities farther from the source potentially benefit from warnings, which might provide seconds to minutes of advance notice. Barely enough time to drop, cover, and hold on, let alone evacuate buildings. For tsunami warnings, the situation is both better and worse. On one hand, tsunamis travel slower than earthquake waves, potentially allowing more warning time. The Philippines has established 36 tsunami detection stations and 10 tsunami early warning systems along vulnerable coastlines. On the other hand, a Manila Trench-generated tsunami could reach western Philippine shores within 15 to 30 minutes, leaving precious little time for evacuation, especially in densely populated areas with limited escape routes to higher ground. The country's building codes represents another critical element of earthquake preparedness. The Philippines adopted the National Structural Code in 1972, which has been periodically updated with modern seismic provisions. On paper, structures built to this code should withstand moderate earthquakes with minimal damage and survive major earthquakes without collapse. However, the reality on the ground tells a different story. Implementation and enforcement of these codes remain inconsistent across the country. Resource limitations at local government units, corruption in the construction industry, and a lack of qualified inspectors create significant gaps between written standards and built reality. In Metro Manila alone, engineering surveys suggest that thousands of buildings, including schools, hospitals, and residential structures, would be highly vulnerable in a major earthquake scenario. The government's disaster response framework has evolved significantly following lessons from previous calamities. The National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council coordinates a whole-of-government approach to disasters, with counterparts at regional, provincial, and municipal levels. This tiered system theoretically enables both top-down strategic direction and bottom-up local response. However, the scale of a Manila Trench mega-earthquake would likely overwhelm even this improved system, especially if multiple regions require simultaneous assistance. Perhaps the most crucial yet underdeveloped aspect of earthquake preparedness in the Philippines lies at the community and household levels. Studies consistently show that in catastrophic disasters, the first responders are not professional emergency services, but neighbors helping neighbors. Communities with strong social cohesion and basic disaster training typically experience lower casualty rates and faster recovery. Some local governments have recognized this reality and implemented community-based disaster risk reduction programs that train neighborhood emergency response teams, conduct regular drills, and establish evacuation protocols. Cities like Marikina and Quezon City have become models for urban resilience initiatives. However, these efforts remain unevenly distributed, with many vulnerable communities still lacking basic preparedness plans. At the household level, simple preparations can dramatically increase survival odds. Securing heavy furniture to walls, knowing how to shut off utilities, maintaining emergency supplies of water and food, having a family communication plan, and identifying safe spots within homes can mean the difference between life and death. Unfortunately, surveys indicate that despite living in one of the most disaster-prone countries, many Filipino families have made minimal preparations for major earthquakes. Emerging technologies are beginning to reshape the disaster preparedness landscape. Advanced remote sensing techniques can now identify subtle ground deformations along fault lines. Artificial intelligence algorithms are being developed to rapidly assess building damage from satellite imagery following earthquakes. Mobile applications can provide location-based hazard information and evacuation directions. Social media platforms, despite their potential for misinformation, have proven valuable for coordinating grassroots response efforts during recent disasters. International cooperation plays a vital role in the Philippines' earthquake resilience strategy. Organizations like the Japan International Cooperation Agency and the United States Geological Survey provide technical expertise and equipment for monitoring systems. The Asian Development Bank and World Bank offer financing for infrastructure and strengthening and post-disaster recovery. Regional bodies like ASEAN have established protocols for mutual assistance following major disasters. These international partnerships will be crucial in responding to a disaster of the magnitude a Manila Trench earthquake could produce. Looking forward to the future, the Philippines faces a delicate balancing act. Raising public awareness about the Manila Trench threat is essential for motivating preparedness. Yet authorities must avoid creating undue panic or fatalism. Economic development priorities often compete with disaster risk reduction for limited government resources. Retrofitting existing vulnerable structures is enormously expensive, yet failing to do so could result in catastrophic casualties. The path forward likely involves pragmatic incrementalism, focusing first on critical infrastructure and essential facilities like hospitals and schools, gradually expanding to broader retrofitting programs and continuously improving early warning capabilities. Most importantly, it requires building a culture of preparedness where individuals, communities, businesses, and government all recognize their roles and responsibilities in creating resilience. The Manila Trench may indeed represent one of the Philippines' most significant natural threats, but history has repeatedly shown that societies that prepare, adapt, and respond collectively to disaster risks can survive and eventually thrive again, even after the most devastating events. The key lies not in eliminating the risk, which is impossible, but in reducing vulnerabilities, building capacity, and fostering the social and institutional resilience needed to weather the literal and figurative storms ahead. If you found this exploration of the Manila Trench and earthquake preparedness insightful, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into fascinating scientific topics. And let us know in the comments what other geological phenomena you'd like us to cover next. As always, stay insanely curious.